Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm going to just give one more minute for the attendees to populate the event before we officially start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this HLPF pop-up side event. Our focus today is the launch of a new paper, Financing for the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement, the UN Ecosystem of Initiatives on Private Sector Finance. This event has been organized by Stakeholder Forum for a Sustainable Future in cooperation with New World Frontiers Publications. I'm Charles Newhan, Chairman of Stakeholder Forum and your host today from New York. I'm joined today by an exceptional panel of speakers, including the editor of this new paper, Felix Dodds, adjunct professor at the University of North Carolina in the United States, who is also a sustainable development consultant. For those of you unfamiliar with Stakeholder Forum, it is an international not-for-profit NGO that has, for over 25 years, been working to advance sustainable development at all levels. Stakeholder Forum seeks to provide a bridge between those who have a stake in sustainable development and the international fora where decisions are made in their name. To this end, SF works with a diversity of stakeholders globally on international policy development and advocacy, stakeholder engagement and consultation, media and communications, and capacity building, all with the ultimate objective of promoting progressive outcomes on sustainable development through an open and participatory approach. Our partner in the production of this new paper, New World Frontiers, is a publishing house that focuses on sustainable development around the intergovernmental processes. Run by people who have engaged in the intergovernmental process at the United Nations, its related agencies and programs, and its legally binding conventions, New World Frontier publishes papers and Kindle e-reader and print-to-order books that advance the global understanding of how sustainable development can bring about change. In 2014, New World Frontiers launched its first Kindle book, The Plain Language Guide to Rio +20, Preparing for the New Development Agenda. It has since published several Kindle and print-to-order books, including 5 books on governance for sustainable development for the Friends of Governance for Sustainable Development. Now, before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and live streamed on the Stakeholder Forum YouTube channel. That recording, by way of a link to the SF YouTube page and a copy of the presentations from today, will be posted on the Stakeholder Forum website. You will receive a link to them tomorrow via the Zoom platform. There will be 7 presenters today, each of whom will speak to up to 5 minutes. And I ask that each of the presenters please try their best to stay to that time period. As you will see, all attendee cameras and microphones are muted and will remain that way throughout the webinar. Apologies in advance for not being able to take questions for participants due to time constraints and also the fact that we're doing this during the HLPF. We want to keep this event to just an hour so as not to be disruptive. Please, however, note that the chat box is active if you wish to communicate with each other, and do all feel free to add useful links or documents that are related to the subject at hand in the chat box. We'll share that content with all of you afterwards. And we're also going to add one piece of content, which will be a link to the paper being launched today. That's it for the housekeeping. Why don't we begin now? We'll introduce our first presenter. It's Felix Dodds, is adjunct professor at the University of North Carolina. Felix, please unmute your microphone and activate your camera, and you have the floor.
Thanks, Charles. The delivery of the 2030 agenda for
Felix, we can't hear you.
I am unmuted.
You're good. We can hear you. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Charles. The delivery of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was estimated after it was agreed by several organizations from UNCTAD, the World Bank, and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network to be in the region of $3 to $5 trillion annually. With the impact of COVID, that will have to be recalculated. And that dwarfs the contribution from overseas development aid, which in 2020 was $161 billion. This, of course, was the year that we all faced the unprecedented challenge from the COVID-19 pandemic. The effects we will not really know for years, but which has, according to the World Social Report produced by the UN in 2020, increased income inequality in most countries. The Secretary General warned us, income disparities and a lack of opportunities are creating a vicious cycle of inequality, frustration, and discontent across generations. And this brings me to the financing of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. This cannot be achieved by aid alone. There will need to be a refocusing of private sector finance. And Charles, could you put the second slide up? In a globalized world where we're facing the challenges of addressing climate change and the pandemic, the UN offers multilateralism a place to assist in building an ecosystem, helping to redirect the financial sector to help address these and other problems, such as ensuring that we leave no one behind. This paper, with the help of the UN agencies and programs engaged in this ecosystem, shows that is underway. The slide that you're looking at is from Steve Waygood of Aviva, produced a couple of years ago, and it shows the capital market and the different stages of it. It also identifies some of the main players in the different parts. If you can change the reward system between the different stages of the capital market, and you can move investments towards supporting good things. The realignment of the private sector finance to support sustainable development and to stop funding activities that take us in the wrong direction has accelerated since the Rio conference in 2012, the Rio Plus 20 conference. The adoption of the SDGs and the Addis Ababa action agenda on financing for development, and of course the Paris Climate Agreement. But I just point out one area where there's an interesting example. There are only 3 credit rating agencies, S&P Global Ratings, Moody's, and Finch Group, which control over 90% of the credit rating in the global market. If you build into the rating climate risk and other sustainability issues, investments would flow to the companies with good sustainability policies. So 3 companies changing their policies would have a huge impact on investment. And it's important that the UN is involved with talking to those credit rating agencies about what they should do. We need a new generation of policy innovation aimed to ensure that financial systems serve the needs of inclusive, environmental, sustainable economic development. If we could have slide 3, Charles. The first example of work in the paper, as you will see, is about the UN General Assembly annual resolution promoting investment for sustainable development. And I'm always keen to give credit where credit is, and the work around pushing for a listing requirement for companies on stock exchanges to have to produce a sustainable development strategy and an annual ESG reports to be listed was promoted by a group of investors led by Aviva, supported by Stakeholder Forum as part of the Rio Plus 20 process. It didn't succeed in getting a commitment in Rio Plus 20 and did try during the Addis Ababa action agenda discussions to get a commitment there. But both of those documents did promote the idea of companies reporting their ESG. The incoming president of the UN General Assembly in 2015, Morgans Leitoft from Denmark, picked up the issue during the first Financing for Development Forum in 2016, and then initiated a process with the support of many of the agencies and programs that are supporting this report to produce a report called Linking the Chain of Sustainable Finance, Accelerating Private Investment for the SDGs, including climate action. The report was produced for him by the Brookings Institute, and then it was picked up after the report came out by the government of Nigeria, who then sought and succeeded in getting an annual UN General Assembly resolution on promoting investments for sustainable development. enabling a place where member states can look at what could be done to align investments much more for sustainable development. Changing the direction of investments so they support sustainable development and address climate change is one of the most important developments of the last few years. And as I hand back to the chair, I'd like to thank the UN bodies who have been working on this for their work and ask stakeholders to engage in supporting these efforts as we move forward. Thank you. Charles, back to you.
Felix, thank you very much for those introductory comments. And I would thank you for muting your camera. Our next speaker is Krishnan Sharma, who is Chief of the Strategic Engagement Unit at the Financing for Sustainable Development Office at UN, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA. Krishnan, if you'd be so kind as to activate your camera and microphone, I will pass the floor on to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Charles. And many thanks to you and Felix for the invitation to speak at this event. So I will focus my remarks on private finance initiatives undertaken by the Financing for Sustainable Development Office in UNDESA. If you could please go to the next slide. Thank you. So this really, I mean, as Felix correctly mentioned, I mean, achieving the SDGs will require a significant scaling up of private finance and investment, but not just any private finance and investment. It has to be the investment that is aligned with the SDGs, longer term investment. So one of the real challenges, firstly, is increasing the supply of finance and long-term investment aligned with the SDGs. And the second one, of course, at the same time, is channeling this to countries and sectors where it is urgently needed. So we have a number of initiatives working on it, but given the limited time, I'm going to focus in particular on two of them, which is the Gisd Alliance and the SDG Investment Fair. If we could possibly go to the next slide, please, Charles. Thank you very much. So the Gisd Alliance was formed in 2019 and it's an initiative of the Secretary General. It's an alliance of 30 CEOs from across the world, whose work is supported by sort of core agencies in the UN system, which are coordinated by UNDESA. The agencies include UN Global Compact, UNFFI, UNDP, UNCDF, UNCTAD. So it's a range of agencies, PRI, and so forth. The objective really is to look for solutions to scale up long-term investment for sustainable development. And really, I mean, you know, if you look at the heart of what it's about moving the money behind the SDGs. And I would say that, you know, I would in fact draw up the analogy of a cake, in fact, when describing the objectives of Gisd. The first thing is to increase the size of the cake being private finance and investment for the SDGs. And you do that through looking at incentives, unblocking the obstacles to long-term private and finance and investment for the SDGs. At the same time, though, the cake has to be divided in a fair and equitable manner. And that's about channeling money to those countries and sectors that need it the most. And finally, the cake needs to be rich. So Gisd also looks at impact, increasing the impact, and it looks at it through the development of SDG-related metrics. In the 2 years since it's been formed, the Gisd, despite the pandemic, has had a number of, important achievements. First and foremost, it's arrived at the definition of sustainable development investment. It's really clear that we need to know what sustainable development investment is, what investment is aligned to the SDGs, to ensure that whatever investment we try to scale up is not simply greenwashing. It's actually investment that has an impact and matters. It's also sort of undertaken in collaboration with a range of important bodies, including the European Commission. It's in fact a part of the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group. It's a part of COP26. It's a part of Finance in Commons. And it's also formed a collaboration with the IFRS Foundation too. All this is important because it'll then have an input on the work program of these organizations with the long-term objective of, steering the work towards, scaling up long-term investment for the SDGs. Now, Gisd works around some critical deliverables. One of which is, looking at instruments, platforms, and and tools, instruments, tools, and platforms. So it's coming up, for example, with an SDG investment platform, which will sort of map, and it's working in collaboration closely with UNDP. In fact, it's the UNDP's platform, which will map sort of SDG sort of related investments in developing countries. And not just that, but bring this to the attention of the wider investor community and elevate this into a deal sharing platform. It's also working on an SDG related blended finance fund, focusing particularly on infrastructure, but as a non-infrastructure fund, which is also likely to come up. It's working, as I mentioned, on development of SDG related metrics. And finally, there is also some work happening on developing a model mandate, working on incentives between asset owners and asset managers, because asset owners are the source of the investment chain. Once asset owners have adequate longer term objectives and pass this on in their contractual relationship to asset managers, what you see is you'll then see an effect, a ripple effect across the investment chain, ultimately to recipient companies, focusing a greater, leading to a greater focus, in fact, on longer termism and a greater alignment of business operations and investments with sustainable development. So those are some critical areas that the GIST is working on. And for more information, I'll be happy to speak bilaterally with people and also direct you to our website. If we could move to the next slide, please, Charles. Now, complementary to the GIST is the SDG Investment Fair. And SDG Investment Fair really tries to sort of, ensure to the degree possible that investments move to countries that need it the most. And by those countries, I'm speaking about countries which are making actually an effort to improve their enabling environment for investors, but are not quite on the radar of investors. So we're not talking about the most popular emerging markets, nor are we talking about the poorest countries, which are not on investors' radars. And to be honest, which would benefit from solid public investment and aid as well. So we're talking about that gray area of countries. And to give you an example, in this year's SDG Investment Fair, we had the countries we focused on were Pakistan, Ghana, Kenya, and Jamaica, all of whom have been making sort of important efforts, in fact, to improve their enabling environment for investors. What the SDG Investment Fair does first and foremost is it brings these countries and investors together, where countries can then, present, their projects to investors. And then following that, they can continue to liaise and engage with investors. So the first fair happened in 2018, which was a small event. The 2019 one was a very significant physical event, including both country presentations and discussions of thematic projects. This year was a virtual event, very rich, but we have further plans looking ahead. We want the SDG Investment Fair to not just be a once-a-year event. We'd like this to be a year-long standing platform, whereby we continue to engage with countries and we bring on board new countries. We have sort of hired specialists, interregional advisors who have worked on these issues. And we're having sort of another fair event which takes place in September. We are we sent out an invitation for countries to apply to be a part of it, and another one in December, followed by one in April. The one in September and December will likely be virtual. The one next April, we hope, will be a return to physical SDG Investment Fair. Now, the fair runs concurrently with the ECOSOC FFD Forum. And here I wanted to, surrounding GIC and SDG Investment Fair, the other complementary activities that the FSD of DESA undertakes on private finance. That is the ECOSOC FFD Forum, which is our flagship event. And that usually has a major sort of panel, in fact, on private finance and investment. Every year it has. And it runs very complementary to the SDG Investment Fair. We also, on the analytical side, have the Financing for Sustainable Development report, which also has a chapter dedicated often to the work undertaken by the GIST Alliance, but to research issues surrounding it. Finally, FSD of DESA's work, doesn't just stop here. Even the work, in fact, with the tax committee, in fact, deals with incentives for responsible long-term private investment in developing countries. I won't go into detail on that because that's an area out of my expertise, but this is just to point out that the work across the office, in fact, focuses to a large degree, in fact, on ways to scale up private finance and investment that is aligned with the SDGs. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Krishnan, thank you so much for such great detail within a short period of time. Of course, there's a bit more detail in the document, but I have to say your comments today added a tremendous amount to what appears in the actual document. So Krishnan, I'll ask you to now close your camera and microphone, and I'm going to invite our next speaker to join us. Olgi Tetik is the Knowledge Management and Communications Specialist at the United Nations Development Program SDG Finance Sector Hub. I see that you've activated your camera. Thank you so very much. I will pass the floor to you now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Greetings from Gdańsk, my hometown. Thank you, Charles and Felix, very much for the invitation, for the introduction and opportunity. I'm very pleased to join you. And hearing like Felix and Krishnan as well, it's really nice to see, and I'm sure the other speakers also like in the presentations will complement each other's work, which is very, very satisfying. So I want to start with the very nice, positive, motivating developments in the past 2 weeks that you might have followed as well, which Felix also referred to as global policy innovation. So those are happening, and as UNDP, we are very proud and honored to be part of it. The very first G20 development ministers meeting ended with a communique which recognized the key role INFFs play in the alignment of finance in over 70 countries, which UNDP leads together with our partners. Here, I'd like to point out the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, which we have an honor to provide the Secretariat function for, has been reactivated during the Italian presidency last year and has been also upgraded. As it has been mentioned by many, lack of transparency, accountability, and clarity are the roadblocks. To address this, mandated under the French G7 presidency with OECD, we developed a global sustainable finance framework that also provides recommendations for future policies. A few weeks ago, we also published with OECD the impact standards for financing sustainable development to address the roadblocks. As also mentioned by Krishnan, we are working within the Financing for Development initiative, which under the leadership of Canada and Jamaica and the UN Secretary General. Now currently there are 6 thematic clusters, and one of the clusters, which is on sustainability and climate action, is facilitated by UNDP. As UNDP, we work with our partners towards the alignment of available public and private finance with impact through the SDGs. On the left-hand side, you can see a wheel and 7 action areas. So we work around those 7 action areas. So first part of the wheel is focuses on public finance and the rest on private finance. Next slide, please. You can explore the action areas in detail on our platform, SDG Finance platform. Today, I would like to focus on a few of UNDP initiatives that act on the challenges expressed by Felix today and by the government representatives and UN agency principals during the private sector event, private sector high-level political forum event, if you have attended today. UNDP has 4 flagship initiatives in SDG finance, 3 of the flagship initiatives, which are SDG Impact, Insurance Risk Finance Facility, and Digital Finance, focus on increasing private sector's engagement in development. It's very interesting, in fact, during the pandemic, the global wealth has increased to 430 trillion from 370 trillion US dollars. But the FDI flows to developing economies decrease. So to reverse the direction, as Krishna nicely already introduced, we develop SDG investor maps to provide country-level market intelligence on SDG-aligned, fully profitable investment. Up until now, we have identified more than 200 investment opportunities in 15 countries, and the work has just begun. We are continuing with many more countries, and this market intelligence is available thanks to the partnership with the GISD Alliance on SDG Investor Platform. UNDP also developed SDG impact standards for private equity funds, bond issuers, and enterprises. And I need to say that they're already being used in the market. For example, the New Development Bank in China a few weeks ago announced an SDG bond issuance utilizing the UNDP standards and taxonomy, which is very heartening to us. Unfortunately, the current pandemic crisis has provided everyone with an intense training on planning for the unexpected. In partnership with the German government and the Insurance Development Forum, UNDP's second flagship initiative, Insurance and Risk Finance Facility, works on risk finance, risk transfer, and financing of resilience. The flagship will be launched officially in September. However, the full implementation has already started in 5 countries: Ghana, Algeria, Nigeria, Uzbekistan, and Mexico. And the last initiative, which we work together with UNCDF, as you know, there's a growing interest by the private sector on digital platforms and technologies. However, on the other side, there is also a growing concern on the governance, especially the democratic, inclusive governance of the platforms. So UNDP, UNCDF hosted the dialogue on global digital finance governance and explore impact on financial inclusion and governance challenges of big fintechs. I need to say that there is a series of technical papers published available online, which might be of your interest. Next slide, please. The private sector, especially the MSMEs, account for 90% of the jobs, 60% of the GDP in developing countries, but unfortunately are quite fragile and affected by adverse conditions. Here you can see 3. There are in fact many, but I chose these ones due to the time limitation. 3 UNDP initiatives in partnership with others that in fact try to address the challenges that the MSMEs face with. At the very beginning of the pandemic, it was the first days I remember, it was March, that we came together with UN Global Compact and the International Chamber of Commerce and brainstorming on how to help MSMEs around the world. And after the sessions, we created the COVID-19 Private Sector Global Facility. And then we were joined by 3 private sector strategic partners, DHL, Microsoft, and PwC, who provide, of course, top-notch solutions. Already that we see the implementation on the ground in Colombia and Ghana, where MSMEs are started to being supported, especially with digital solutions. Another one is Connecting Business Initiative. It's an UNDP OCHA joint initiative, works through 17 different around global 17 private sector networks, and prepares private sector MSMEs before, during, and after crisis disasters, increasing their resilience. So far, they reached 4,000 companies and 40,000 MSMEs. The last but the mighty one is the UNDP's Business Call to Action platform, My heart is also with the inclusive business because I worked in inclusive business before. So inclusive businesses are the commercially viable businesses that engage low-income people as part of their operations, either it be like in the production, the services, or the distribution. And Business Call to Action has members across the globe, like there are in more than 80 countries, and offers free impact measurement and management services through its Impact Lab to its members. BCTA also supports governments and companies with their reporting of their contribution to the SDGs. Through corporate record, Colombia is the first country that has initiated the process. So thank you very much for listening. It was just a glimpse of our work. I would like to take also the opportunity to invite you to follow our work. I will be dropping some links. Thank you again. Thank you. Over to you, Charles.
Olgi, thank you so much, in particular for adding so much detail in your slides, because that will nicely complement the report, which I've actually just posted in the chat box. And you are also, of course, welcome to post any other links as well. So please do so while you're with us. Let us now move on to our next presenter, and that is Maurice, Head of Sustainable Finance at the United Nations Global Compact. Marie is joining us from France. Please, Marie, unmute your microphone and the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, and welcome everyone. I think we've reached almost 100 people joining us, so it's great to have so many people, and hopefully, you know, I can see the chat being quite lively as well. So I think the brief is 5 minutes. It's obviously a short intro, but we wanted to kind of give you a feel for what we are doing at the UN Global Compact. So for those of you who have not heard of this particular agency, at the UN, we are actually one of the largest sustainability network. We've got more than 13,000 companies working with us as members. We also work across, you know, sort of the UN. So some of my colleagues I work closely with, Krishnan and others here on the call today. A couple of things I wanted to kind of sort of move on to, if we can kind of get to the next slide, that would be great. So the compact really kind of, you know, got together and was thinking about what could be our unique way to tackle this this huge, you know, sort of issue that we're all facing on financing for the SDGs. So about 2 years ago, Amina Mohamed, the DSG, and a group of CEOs working with the compact got together, and you know, the idea of sort of focusing on CFOs actually came about. So the group that I'm leading is actually a range of different companies from different sectors, different geographies, focusing on helping CFOs to allocate capital towards the SDGs. So that's really how it all started, and I just thought you know, it'd be nice to kind of look back, and it's very parallel to the GISD development as well, and you know, we're working closely. So GISD focusing on the investor side, and then, you know, on our side really kind of focusing on CFOs and chief financial officers and the roles that corporate finance can play towards the financing of the SDGs. If we move to the next slide. Thank you, Charles. So the story goes, you know, sort of, we've been growing to now sort of 60 members. So you'll see hopefully soon on the next slide, sort of the companies and the range that we're working with. We've come up with a kind of range of 3 goals that we are focusing on. So one, engaging the global CFO community. So how can we reach out to companies and ensuring that CFOs are part of this global movement. Number 2 is around integrating the SDGs into the strategy of the company. So, and I think we touched on briefly already, you know, sort of bonds in particular, and how the importance of financial instruments and ensuring that capital you know, is shifted towards the strategy of the company. So not just towards one project, but actually transforming the business over time. So that's really the second focus of the CFO task force. And then the third one is around creating a broad sustainable finance market. So obviously ensuring that, you know, if companies are going to issue those financial instruments, there is appetite from investors and others to respond to those bonds and those financial instruments. So those are the kind of the three goals that we have. We've got obviously a range of websites, guidance, all available, and I will share the link with you all in a minute. And if we move to the next slide, what I was talking about earlier, just to kind of give you a feel for the type of companies that we work with. So I'm not going to go into detail, but hopefully that'll give you a feel for the fact that this is a truly global group that works across sort of different sectors, but also different geographies, and we are definitely growing. So if you're on the line and interested to join us, so by all means get in touch, because we would love to hear more from you. And I'll just kind of finish with the next slide, which is kind of focusing on the types of partnerships that we work with. So I think very similar to the work that Krishnan and DESA and Gisd is sort of doing. We're working closely with, I don't think all the logos are showing, but some investors networks, as well as obviously IFC, UNEP, sort of FI. My colleague Liesl is going to talk to you about that in a minute. So really kind of looking at all different aspects of the work that different groups are doing on this on sustainable finance. And the last slide, which just to share, is sort of set of different events that we are hosting either globally or regionally. So to make sure that you're aware of this, obviously, this is a fantastic opportunity for us to be part of, but there are many others. We're also hosting regional fairs, investors fairs, where we have investors and corporates coming together. And ultimately, this is about, exactly as I think all my colleagues have said previously, encouraging CFOs, sort of as key actors to shift capitals in a different way towards the SDGs. So that's really hopefully a quick round tour of what the task force is about, and I hope that if you are interested, you could join us. But definitely, reach out as well individually if you have any more questions on this. Thank you.
Marie, thank you. That was a wonderful grand tour. And I'm sorry that we've had to limit you to just 5 minutes, because I see from your enthusiasm and your knowledge that you could probably, like the rest of us, go on all day about the work that we do. So thank you so much for that. And as before, your slides will also add wonderful content to the paper that's being launched today. So I'd like to now move on to our next speaker. Now, I'm going to stop sharing the screen because our next speaker does not have any slides to share with us today. We have the benefit of having Tony Bonici with us. He's the officer in charge at the Cooperation and Partnership section at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Tony, please activate your camera and your microphone, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Charles. Good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and greetings from Geneva, Switzerland. I cannot tell you it's sunny here. It's actually quite cloudy, but let us pretend it's sunny. So let me first start by thanking Felix and Charles for bringing us together today, and for your efforts to collect the various UN initiatives on private sector finance in one paper, which is being launched at this event. We have all heard different figures in the region of trillions of US dollars that we keep being reminded are needed across a wide spectrum of infrastructure and public services, and how governments by themselves do not have the resources to deliver on these projects. And of course, this is especially true of the low and middle income countries. In an ideal world, infrastructure and public services are provided and managed by governments as a public good to their citizens. But the reality, sadly, is rather different. And this is where partnerships become more important. The SDGs call for different forms of partnerships, including public-private partnerships, or PPPs, as a tool to close the infrastructure gap. But the complexity in the design and management of these long-term public-private arrangements also present some limitations and challenges. The challenges and limitations of PPPs are important to bear in mind when analyzing the potential of PPPs to promote sustainable development. And in order to realize their social value beyond their economic value, PPPs need to be fit for purpose. That means that PPPs need to move from being a mere financing tool to becoming an instrument that also provides value for people and value for the planet. In this context, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE, has developed the People First PP approach and the 10 guiding principles on People First PPPs in support of the SDGs to provide a model that will foster access to essential public services for all, with sustainable development as its objective and putting people at the core. People First PPPs are defined and are summarized according to 5 specific outcomes. The first, increase access to essential services and lessen social inequality and injustice. Second, improve economic effectiveness and fiscal sustainability. Third, enhance resilience and environmental sustainability. Fourth, promote replicability for the development of further projects. And fifth, fully involve all stakeholders in projects. But launching a new model of PPPs requires new tools to evaluate the effect of PPPs that can measure impact and score projects. The 5 generic outcomes that I just described have been carefully analyzed, and indicators were prepared and added that can be scored to assess the extent to which projects meet the People First designation. This is how the People First PPP evaluation methodology came into being as a tool to improve projects and make them SDG compliant. The methodology is a developmental and capacity building tool in the sense that it is used to improve projects rather than to merely giving a score. Some projects will be evaluated and might not meet the People First designation, but users of the methodology, typically governments, can adjust their project accordingly to do better in the future. The methodology can be applied to the whole project life cycle, so at the various stages of the project, which include identification, development, and implementation stages. However, the earlier the methodology is applied in the project life cycle, the greater value it can deliver. So, for example, the ability to make changes to a project is typically much lower during the project implementation phase than in the project identification phase, where the ability to make changes to the project is by far higher. The methodology is intended to evaluate projects, but it also addresses issues of relevance for project development, such as the institutional framework, the investment and business climate, and government capacity. The methodology tells you the extent to which a project is compliant to the People First outcomes and the SDGs, but it does not replace other important tools used to evaluate the project's bankability, for example. So, in that sense, the methodology complements without replacing other tools used by financiers and governments to assess the economic and financial assessments of their projects. The methodology was released in a self-assessment form last year after it was tested on over 30 projects. It is currently going through a final phase of pilot testing before it is released in its final form in September this year. The methodology is a public good and is available and published on the UNECE website. One last thought about capacity building. Like the SDGs themselves, People First PPP is an ambitious model coming out of the main drivers for the SDGs. That is transformative change to achieve economic, social, and environmental sustainability, poverty eradication, transparency, budgetary sustainability, participation, inclusiveness, and good governance. The UNEC is therefore providing support to its member states for its implementation. And in the case of this methodology, this support is project-based in order to deliver impactful projects. Thank you, Charles. I will stop there and I will be happy to take any questions from the audience.
Tony, thank you ever so much. At the moment, we don't really think we're going to have time for questions, but I would like to say just a few comments about what you said. The importance of the support that you mentioned for projects to actually deliver, sustainability is just so essential. Stakeholder Forum is involved with a nascent private-public partnership that we're trying to move forward, and it's a challenge. And the support that the likes of the UN, ECE, and others provide in moving those things forward is greatly appreciated. So, Tony, I'm going to thank you. I'll ask you to close your camera and mic for a moment. Our next speaker is meant to be Chantaline Carpentier from UNCTAD. I don't know if she's with us, though. There was some question whether her schedule was going to allow it. So I'm going to just take a quick look and see. I don't see her here at the moment. So what I'm going to suggest we do is that we move on to our next speaker, Liesel van Ast. I'll share the screen, Liesel, so that you can then make your presentation, and we can always bring Chantaline in at a later date. So Liesel, I would say over to you. You're membership and regional coordinator, coordination manager at the United Nations Environment Program's Finance Initiative. I've had the pleasure of meeting your colleague, Leah Lee, in New York a while back when the initiative was launched. So I will hand the floor over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles, and they're from Geneva. So I think what UN Environment Programme Finance Initiative really focuses on the private sector. So we work with banks, insurers, mainly, also some investors, but mostly banks and insurers. And it's really about creating the norms, the kind of standard setting for the financial sector on sustainable finance. Could we skip to the next slide, please? Can I move them? I don't think so. So we're a partnership which we were set up back at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 as a partnership between UNEP and the global financial sector. At the time, it was a handful of financial institutions, and now we have over 400 members, which are mostly banks, the majority of them, and then also around 100 insurers. We also have a partnership with the Principles for Responsible Investment, which is the largest institutional investor platform initiative, which we set up with the UN Global Compact back in 2006, and it's now an independent initiative and is really driving change in responsible investment. And so we now focus on banking and insurance mainly. And what we're really doing is working with the industry in order to help them technically figure out how do they integrate sustainability into their operations, into financial products and services, because the private sector finance I think it's around roughly $400 trillion globally in private finance. So of course, shifting that is critical in order to achieve the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. So we can't really have governments and public finance pulling in one direction while the private sector, all of the economic activities financed by the private sector are pulling in another direction. So that is why that is our main focus. Next slide, please. So we have a bunch of initiatives, but I'll just focus on a couple of them. I think I've pretty much said this working with the industry. So next slide, please. Thanks. So we work on capacity building, technical developments, developing guidance, developing tools, resources to really work work with the industry to develop these, to make sure that what we're doing is fit for purpose. It's not just hypothetical, theoretical. It really helps to change market practice and drive it forward. So working generally with those who are leading in specific areas such as climate integration into decision making, to then help share the best practice and knowledge and expertise with the rest of the industry. Also embedding science into financial market practice, so looking at what's coming out of on climate science, biodiversity, ecosystems, nature, to link that, look and help the finance industry link that into how they're making decisions on allocating, whether it's in lending or underwriting or investment. So some of the main sort of frameworks that we have launched to enable this, which really the frameworks really create a kind of convening space to bring together the community of banks and insurers and investors, and that's, we work with those who join these frameworks, and it provides them with a kind of strategy, a way to align their strategy with sustainable finance. So the principles for responsible banking we launched in 2019 with 130 banks. There are now over 230 signatories to the principles for responsible banking, and they really commit to aligning their business, their portfolios, with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement, and also national and regional frameworks. So that's important to note that they should, in that sense, could be helping to implement NDCs, for example, through their financing of utility sectors, of the real economy. So we're working with the banks now on implementing those principles, because it's pretty challenging. And when they commit to setting targets, and then reporting and being held accountable on how they're implementing those targets. And then the principles for sustainable insurance, which we launched back in 2012. So that group of insurers also working on integrating sustainability, developing insurance sustainable development goals at the moment. So looking at what do the SDGs mean if you're providing underwriting services, and what are the insurance solutions that can help achieve the SDGs, for example. So really focusing on practical implementation of sustainable finance. Also engaging with regulators and policymakers, financial policymakers, banking regulators, insurance regulators and supervisors, to help inform them of how they can create more of an enabling environment to really scale up sustainable finance. And then I mentioned the principles for responsible investment, and now the largest institutional investor initiatives, which we work with on an investment leadership program, which was just launched, I think it was last month, which is to help jointly develop projects which help to really drive cutting edge side of responsible investment, which is now pretty much becoming mainstream, since asset owners are including responsible investment requirements in their mandates to asset managers. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is really the banks have committed to that they will align their businesses with society's goals. So it's really through that with the SDGs, but it's putting people and nature front and center of their business. Of course, they still need to make returns and be economically viable, but it's really changing the emphasis to really embed society's goals into their operations. Next slide, please. And that's partly recognizing that the future, this is what you need to do to be fit for purpose for the 21st century, and that this is the only way to address the critical challenges that we face, both on inequality and social issues, but also in terms of pollution, climate, and nature crises. And so this is just an example of some of the initiatives that kind of are subsets of the signatories to the broader frameworks. And so those who really want to drive the front end of achieving some of these goals are the net zero alliances. And so over the past few years, we've launched the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance back in 2019. That's now grown to, I think it's around 46 members with 6.7 trillion. And they're really working on interim targets too, to 2025, for example. They're setting individual targets to show that they're serious about this. They're working on engaging companies to achieve the targets, engaging policymakers, and also, of course, financial products and services. So it's not just waiting till 2050 or till the long-term target to be met. It's taking action now to work towards those targets. We launched the Net Zero Banking Alliance in April. That's also now grown to, I think, 53 banks with 37 trillion in assets in 27 countries. So that's, I think it's about a quarter of global banking assets signed up to net zero portfolios, which means that, you know, when companies are going to them for loans, the conversation they're going to be having is going to be changing. It'll be a conversation that asks about their transition pathways and looks at what are their key performance indicators. How do they track their commitments to achieve these targets of net zero across their lending books, their loan books. Net Zero Underwriting Alliance launched just on Sunday, and that's with 8 reinsurers and insurers. So it's just getting started, and so you'll be hearing more about these, especially as we go up to the COP26. There is also a Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative run by another organization, so it really covers the whole spectrum of the finance sector. And so I think one of the great things about that is that then companies, whether they're looking for investment loans or insurance, will be getting the same signals on financing that they need to shift to net zero, because this is going to be a condition in financing agreements. Next slide, please. Thanks. So yeah, just some of the initiatives. I think some of this has been mentioned already, that we're involved with the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, which is really working on disclosure and also trying to drive green product development across public listed companies. And we host a Sustainable Blue Economy Finance Initiative, which is looking more at, actually we've developed guidance on how you finance sustainable blue economy, getting quite granular into specific sectors. We're just working on version 2 now, which will look at, for example, waste management and extractive industries. And if you're a bank, insurer, investor, what does it mean if you're trying to make the sort of ocean related industries go blue, then what do you need to consider to make sure your lending to these types of industries is going to be sustainable. So that's just some of the work that we're doing, and happy to answer any questions in any follow-ups. Thank you.
Gisd, thank you ever so much for that rich content, which is, with others, will complement nicely the paper that's being launched today. Let's, as we're running out of time, but we have a little bit of extra time, we're going to invite our colleague Raymond Lenveld, who's going to speak on behalf of Chantaline Carpentier of UNCTAD. Raymond, if you'd be so kind as to activate your microphone and camera, I'm happy for you to have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Chantaline has another obligation, so that's why I'm here in her stead. I hope you can see me. Yes, I see myself there. So I just saw from Van As' presentation, one of the points I would like to make on UNCTAD's participation in the Sustainable Stock Exchange initiative. And in that sense, we also elaborated principles on responsible lending and borrowing, as well as principles for responsible agriculture investment that respects rights, livelihood, and resources with FAO, IFAD, and others. So we're cooperating with many of the institutions that just spoke, also with DESA. We have been designated since the first international conference on financing for development as one of the major institutional stakeholders of the FFD process. And in that sense, we also contribute to the Financing for Sustainable Development report. So thanks, Felix, and everybody who invited us to take part in this work. You'll see there in the publication UNCTAD's work in this regard. We do our work more from the macro level and helping the countries to develop their policies so that they could take part in the international trading system. But we also help developing countries with their investment policies to make them more development friendly, but to make them also less dependent on commodities. We support with increased access to digital technologies as well. I saw in Felix's presentation, he talked about the resolution and promoting investments for sustainable development. We have been designated the substantive secretariat for that, and we produce a report as part of the World Investment Report that we produce annually. Last year, the 2020 World Investment Report was entitled International Production Beyond the Pandemic. This year is investing in a sustainable recovery. And last year, the focus on the SDGs was in the chapter 5 that looked at the SDG investment trends in developing countries, SDG financing trends in global markets, the ESG integration trends, and mainstreaming the SDGs in investment policies. This year, the SDG chapter is chapter 2, and it focuses on the trends in the developing countries, the countries in special situation, Africa, LDCs, LLDCs, and so on. I have shared through the chat a link to the UNCTAD website and to the investment website, since I don't have a lot of time to speak. So participants can take a greater look at what we're doing in regard to helping countries with their investment policy reviews, the investment statistics and trends, our work on international investment agreement and investment facilitation and promotion, and the publication, which I just mentioned, one of them, the World Investment Report, and as well as the trends, the investment trend monitor on investment trend monitor on the sustainable development goals. You'll find all that on the website. Maybe rest me to say that in October, we will have the 7th World Investment Forum. Every quadrennial conference that we have, the World Investment Forum is part of it, and it's the biggest attended investment event that we do every 2 years. The last one attracted 2,000 participants with heads of states, ministers, governors of central bank, finance and ministers, CEOs of private sector, and so on. So the information is there in the publication, but as well I share this link to our work for participants that are more interested to know or what UNCTAD is doing. Thank you very much.
Raymond, thank you. Please stay with us. I'd like to ask all of the panelists to reactivate their, pardon me, their videos. Put your microphones on mute just for a moment. So those of you who are still with us, please turn on your cameras. And I'd like to, as we've gone a little bit over time, the next step in this officially was to ask Felix, as editor of the document, to say a few words before we wrap up. So Felix, let's start with that. And depending on whether or not our guests have the time to stay with us and participants have time to stay with us, we might have time for each of our panelists to say a couple of final words. So Felix, over to you.
Always forgetting to unmute. I think we're kind of looking forward to in-person meetings so that we don't have to unmute ourselves. I think it's fascinating how far we've come in the context of the engagement with the private sector finance. And I was involved with UNEP-FI going back to Mike Kelly's period in the early 1990s and Paul Clement Hunt in the 2000s, and now under Eric Usher's work. It's amazing how far we've come, but UNEP-FI was to some extent very much there at the beginning at Rio in '92 and has built such an impressive piece of work which other agencies, programs, and all of us have benefited from. So I've always seen UNEP-FI as one of the jewels in the UNEP portfolio. But I'd like to thank Charles for moderating his stakeholder forum, for putting on what is the second pop-up event. So we've done this naughtily for 2 HLPFs. And I obviously clearly owe UNDESA a lot of coffee when I see them in place. The first one was on the HLPF, is it fit for purpose? And the answer was no, but there's a report that you can read off the Stakeholder Forum website from last year. We're very fortunate to have a number of the people engaged in that meeting who were part of the negotiating team that negotiated the HLPF, which was actually set up prior to the agreement of the SDGs. I'd like to thank the speakers from the different UN agencies and programs that have helped us put together this event and the paper. And I'd particularly like to thank Chanceline Carpenter, who helped edit the first one and work with me on kind of reaching out to the rest of you to see if you would be interested. And also to Karen from the government of Finland, who asked the question to me last year, did such a paper exist? And so now it does. So thank you, Karen, for asking the question. If you've got any other questions you'd like to ask, which we can do for next year, we'll see what we can do. We'll try and update the paper annually, so it's something that's useful. Maybe do a similar event or something slightly different next year, or a longer one, which is more of a workshop. We're only 2 years away from the midterm review of the SDGs, and we're clearly going in the wrong direction. And so there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to get us back on track for 2030. And I think, you know, we've tried to show in this meeting where the UN agencies and programs are trying to do their bit to engage the private sector finance as a way of helping us to get onto that. There is a third challenge, as well as climate change and the pandemic, and a number of speakers spoke about the digital divide, but it's much bigger than that. President Biden, in his April State of the Union address, said, we'll see more technological change in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 50 years. That's how rapidly artificial intelligence and so much more is changing. So how we deal with those new technologies will also be really important. And many of them are more greener than their previous ones. So one of the issue is to help developing countries, in a sense, leapfrog bad technologies and move to greener ones. And you've seen that through some of the comments on the investment platforms that are being set up. And I think that's really, really important. Finally, I'd like to thank those of you attending and hope that the ecosystem that we've put forward is something that you can engage in. And I thank everyone for putting in the chat box additional links that might be useful, and we'll try and collect those, and where we don't have them in the report, we'll try at some point to add those in there. So can I hand back to you, Charles?
Thank you, Felix. I know we're being a bit naughty by going over time, but we still have over 70 guests, and we still have our very kind panelists. Maybe I'll just say, Christian, would you like to say a last couple of words before we wrap up?
Sure. Thanks very much for the invitation to speak at this very interesting event. I really enjoyed sort of and found it very illuminating, the comments of the other panelists. And I would just say that, you know, private finance is critical. I mean, you know, for the SDGs. But so is public finance. I mean, you know, and they have to complement each other. And what we need to do is we need to sort of attract the right type of private finance. It's long-term finance that is aligned to the SDGs. And for that, you know, we need to think in a holistic manner. We need to think about incentives. At the same time, we also need to think about platforms, instruments, and also information. So we need to look at the bigger picture and look at it in an integrated way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. Olgi, would you like to say a word or two?
Sure. Thank you very much, Charles and Felix, for the opportunity to contribute to the report, and today for the invitation. I learned quite a lot, and really it has been an enlightening session that also showed me the bigger picture, where we, in fact, like a bigger puzzle, which we are part of, and we are trying to work and do our bit, but we are in very close collaboration with each other as well, which is, I think, much more needed than anything else. collaborative efforts and actions, I think, will be the key also in our efforts. So thank you again, and nice to meet you all. Thank you for the participants as well. Thank you. Good day.
Thank you, Olgi. Tony, would you like to say a word?
Yes, thank you, Charles. Let me join others in thanking you and also Felix for bringing us together, and well done, Felix, for putting the paper together, which gave us such an overview of what we do. Sometimes we forget that we are not working on our own; that there are others working as well. I think the challenge now, perhaps going forward, and maybe a challenge for Felix, is how to make us continue working together, not just coming once a year in a nice debate, but how can we ensure sustainability of what we're doing, and how can we, how our efforts can be put together to the benefit of our client member states. So with perhaps that challenge, I will shut up and hand the floor back to you, Charles. Thank you.
Tony, thank you. Challenges are always welcome. I think we need them. We need more of them in order to move things forward with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement and other intergovernmental agreements. Liesl, would you like to say a word or two before we wrap up?
Thank you, and also thanks for the opportunity. No, I'd agree with that on challenge. So there's clearly still a long way to go. A lot more needs to be done, and this type of action really needs to accelerate to achieve all of the goals and for a more resilient economy. If anyone's interested in finding out more about some of the work that the industry is doing and that we're working with, then we have a series of regional roundtables. The next one's Latin America, Caribbean, at the end of August. So if you're on our website, go to events, you can see recordings of some of these events where you can hear from banks, insurers, investors, and regulators and others what they're actually doing. And otherwise, I think just good to keep in touch and keep trying to drive things forward. Thank you.
Liesl, thank you. Raymond, special thanks to you for stepping in for Chantaline. You can have the last word before I give the closing comments. Raymond, you're still muted.
Thank you. So it's good to hear and to see, if everyone moving into the direction of working more and closer together. Maybe in that sense, I should inform that UNCTAD also is involved in leading the work on Cluster 3 on the initiative on financing for development in the COVID-19 era and beyond, the Cluster 3 on finance and technology. And this morning, we had a side event together with ILO and UNDP on the role of finance and business in financing a sustainable recovery. So you see the work is going like in the same and very good direction. I'll keep it at that, and thank you very much for the invitation to contribute to the paper, but also to participate in this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond, and please share our best wishes with Chantaline. I think it's now time to wrap up. We've gone just a little bit over, so I just have a couple of very final comments. Firstly, thank you so much, Felix, for being the spark to get this going and for coordinating putting the paper together. Many thanks to all of you around the world for joining us today, and in particular to New World Frontiers for spearheading the development of the new paper on financing the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. Of course, a big thanks to our panelists from all over the world for delivering today's rich content. As mentioned earlier, the webinar has been recorded, and that recording, by way of a link to the SF YouTube page and a copy of the presentations, I'll also include some information from the chat box, will be posted on the Stakeholder Forum website soon. You'll all get a link automatically tomorrow from Zoom with that information. Thanks to you all. Thank you ever so much for your participation, especially during the busy HLPF time. That's it from us. Be well, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye. Bye.